Welcome to Heart Standard. My name is Craig Cairns, and today I'm joined by Scott McIntosh, who you probably will have heard on Scarves Around the Funnel. How are you doing, Scott?
Yeah, very well, Craig. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to seeing what some of the questions are going to be like that come in this evening.
Yes, we've already got a few on one. It looks like one topic's already been decided by the comments. Stuart Jambo's come in and said, could have sworn that the time said 5:30 earlier. Now, we do sometimes change the time and put it back. We didn't this time, though. And we are sometimes late. We have been up to an hour late in the past, but no, not our fault this time. Just before we do get into the meat of today, I will just go through some housekeeping stuff. Thanks everybody for joining us. As we said, this is a bit of a Q&A session. So we are looking for your input to kind of drive where the conversation is going. As I said, there's already a few comments in about one subject, which we will get to. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what we do, please go over to heartstandard.co.uk and check that out. We also have an app if you prefer to look at our content on that. And finally, Heart Standard is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. Start your search today. Now, we're going to start with a chat about Islam Chesnokov. Derek McInnes was a guest on the Premier Sports Social Club last night. You can check out the full interview of that on their YouTube channel. And I think the most interesting quotes were to do with Islam Chesnokov. I will, before we get into it, Scott, I'll just play a clip of that from last night and then we'll get into it.
And Kazakhstan international, playing at a good level for a period of time. We feel he's ahead of some of the boys that were brought in terms of the levels and in terms of the experience. So some of them there's that understanding when you bring them in that there's a bit of time to nurture them and get them up to it. But I think Chesnikov is a couple of steps ahead of the level where some of the lads will sign. So I think he's one that can come in and hit the ground running.
Derek, I was just wanting to ask, with regards to Chesnikov, obviously I think it's October next month that his contract's finished. When would he realistically, I know he can't sign till January, is there any rules, regulations, laws that stop him from coming earlier to try and settle in a bit quicker?
No, I don't think so. I think the kind of rule of thumb with all that is, as you say, he finishes October, he gets a bit of a break maybe through November, and then the intention I think for him to join us in December and just integrate through training, all being well. But he has signed, he just can't play till January, as you know, with the window opening. So we just want to try and make sure he's as fully prepared and as ready as he can be for us, really, in that first game proper in January.
Now, he was kind of talking about Aziu and Chesnikov at the same time here, and he went on to say, Aziu gives us something different. Chesnikov really nails down that right side position. We've got Karjota that can play there as well, and we're trying to work him towards finding his feet and having more of an impact there. And it seems to be, Scott, the point that he's making there is that the likes of Aziu and Chesnikov, he sees as players that can come in and play right away, whereas others, he mentions Karjota specifically there. I know you've mentioned him a couple of times in the last few weeks, or maybe more sort of like medium-term projects.
Yeah, I think with the number of signings that we made over the summer, there was always going to be this. I think most fans expect the majority of signings to be made over the summer to be people that are going to have an immediate impact on the squad. Whereas I think what we're going to be doing with the analytics is we are trying to be ahead of the curve. We are trying to beat other teams to sign in these players that we see on an upward trajectory, and we're trying to kind of get that signing done maybe a year or two before other clubs notice. And I think because of that, there is going to be, and I know people hate this term because it's been used in the past for players who we've then actually all of a sudden wanted to use straight away. So if you think of the likes of Musa Drami and Yutaro Oda, there was that tag of project, but within weeks or months, those players would tend to be, first team players. I do think the likes of Karjota, maybe Magnuson to an extent, Kabori, I think we will be looking at some of those players as low risk signings in terms of the financial outlay, but there's a huge upward sort of reward in that if they come in and they do a good job over a sort of 18 to 24 month period. But the chances are that first 5 or 6 months, it's going to be a big sort of integration period in terms of getting up to speed, either with the pace of the game or maybe the physical aspect of the game. That certainly seems to be the aspect that I think they've wanted to nail down with Jota up to this point. But in terms of the Chesnikov section that they were discussing, it was really heartening to hear McInnes be so positive about him, because Chesnikov's been one of those names that's been on the radar of the club prior to McInnes coming in. He was one of those names that came along towards the beginning of the year with Borchevink and Kizididis. So it's good to know that McInnes is quite happy with what he's seen of him in terms of the clips as well. And that'll hopefully give us a more permanent option down the right-hand side, because that's been a bit of that's probably exacerbated the issue with the right back / right wing back situation. It's the fact that we haven't had too many options in front of them, and we've had to try and, shoehorn Kabori in, play Forrest on there when he's maybe not been high on confidence as well. So it was a really good segment, and it pointed towards the fact that the clubs seem to already be getting their ducks in a row in terms of January.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a lot of signings, so there's obviously going to be people at different stages, and then they're going to get different opportunities. And I think McInnes has done well to do as well as he's done results-wise so far, and still give so many players a game. Remember, people were crying out for Kizididis to play more before he actually did, and he kind of slowly bled them into the team. And Kizididis is an example of somebody grasping their chance. And then you look at somebody you've already mentioned, Kabori, Magnuson, and Kabori will come in a bit more detail later, but they are maybe examples of players who, I know you can maybe argue about positions or the games they've been put into and these kind of things, but these are examples of players who've been given a chance, not quite taken it, so they've sort of taken a step back, and they'll get their chance again. I mean, Magnuson didn't look too shabby in the short time he was on the field at Ibrox, for instance.
No, definitely. And he's one I've got high hopes for, just based on the clips I've seen of him and the time I've seen him. Even that first half against St Mirren, there was enough that I saw of him in terms of on the ball where he could offer you an option. Again, possibly in a free, maybe more than in a sort of deep line too. But it's good to have these options. And I think, again, going back to the conversation around, people maybe getting a little bit frustrated or sort of anxious about seeing some of these players have more of an impact. I think you've got to try and distance what we're doing now, summer to what we've maybe done in summers past. So if you look at maybe, transfer activity in the 18-19 season, I think we signed maybe 15 or 16 players that window. We signed maybe about 8 central midfielders as well. And Ryan Edwards obviously comes in that summer, barely gets a game, gets loaned out to St Mirren, decides to tweet celebrating a St Mirren goal against Hearts, then has to come back to Hearts, and then ends up playing the last 4 or 5 games and scores in the Scottish Cup final. I don't think this style of recruitment is as scattergun as maybe what we've seen under previous regimes. So I think if you don't see somebody coming into the squad, I wouldn't get too overly concerned that means that they're out the picture or on the periphery. It probably points to the fact that Derek McInnes has had a full, frank conversation with these players at the beginning and said, look, we see you guys as maybe, project players that will progress over a sort of 1 or 2 or 3 year spell. But we do think that there's potential in you. And when you consider the backgrounds of the leagues that we're signing these players from, they're going to a higher profile club. They're going to be on better wages. There's going to be more eyes on them as well. So although they maybe won't get the minutes that they'll be looking for at the beginning, they will understand that they are on an upward trajectory overall in their career. And it's just a case of taking the opportunity when it eventually comes to them.
I was laughing towards the end there because of the comment that just came in. It's nothing to do with what you said. As I thought that's just kind of come to mind there. Is Harry Milne a good example of what Hearts fans should expect from the signing policy going forward? Because he was a guy that came in and then barely played at all, couldn't get into the team because of the Player of the Year. The Player of the Year gets sold, and then he's a ready-made replacement. And I mean, who knows how much he was just ready to step in anyway, and how much that 5-6 months at the club or whatever helped him bed in. But is that sort of an example of what Hearts fans look forward to? Because I think that's what they want, isn't it? That they want ready-made replacements if teams come in and hoover up your best players.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think Milne's a really good example of that. And again, it points to the melting pot of different characters and personalities that we need within this squad, especially when the squad is as big as it is just now. Not every player that we have just now will be someone who will be expecting to play week in, week out. To try and keep the squad happy, there will be a sort of handful of players. I think I've pointed to the likes of Kingsley, Spittle, Forrest in the past, who may be at a stage in their career where they realise that this is now the ceiling where they are at just now, and that the next move for them will be on a downward trajectory. So they will not rock the boat to the same extent as others may, if they're maybe not quite getting the minutes that they would expect at other clubs. So you've got to try and get that mix in there somewhere, and I think that's what some of the new players will be doing as well. Naturally, there's some other examples where you do think they're maybe on the periphery in terms of the likes of Khartoum, and obviously, you know, Musa and Vargas in the past as well. But I think generally speaking, Derek McInnes has now a squad of well over 22, 23, 24 that he's willing to work with, which is good for when we get injuries and that, because knowing us, we do tend to get them, and we've seen that recently with Frankie Kent and Adju. So yeah, I'm quite happy with it, and it's difficult just now because there's nothing to really pinpoint on that's really a huge concern. There's little minor things that you can pick on sort of game to game, but generally speaking, in terms of the squad rebuild, they've done a really good job over the summer. Yes, we would have wanted a few extra out the door, but I don't think that was without, you know, the want to try. And I think they've obviously tried to maybe move players on, but we've discussed this ad nauseum. It's a very difficult thing to do when players are on long-term contracts. So you might see a bit more movement, if not January and then next summer. There is a few players out of contract then, so there might be another sort of churn with regards to recruitment come next summer.
Just before we move on from Chesnikov, just quickly, Stuart Jambo says here there's going to be huge expectation on Chesnikov, so I really hope he hits the ground running because that early spell can make or break his Hearts career. I don't disagree, that sometimes can make or break a Hearts player, but I do wonder with Chesnikov, with the expectation and with the excitement, I don't know, do you think I think he might get a bit of a grace period. I think he might. Yeah, I don't know. I can't see, like, after one or two bad performances, Hearts getting on his back, maybe like after a longer period. But I suppose a lot of it as well comes down to what kind of state Hearts are in when he eventually is able to play.
Yeah, I think that's where it boils down to, isn't it? It's going to be, our Hearts in a place where they can afford to carry him maybe through that initial spell when he's maybe just getting to grips with the game. The good thing is, Derek McInnes alluded to that, is that they're hoping to maybe try and get him over sometime in December so they can try and integrate him with the squad prior to signing officially at the beginning of January. I suppose, you know, you again, going back to that 18-19 season as a reference point, you look at the David Vanacek signing in terms of there being that wait time in between him finishing with one club and coming to us, and you can see how that can maybe not be handled correctly, primarily from the player. But of course, by the time he came to the club that season, we were on a slide and we really needed him to hit the ground running, and he couldn't, and he was unable to come back for that. Whereas if he'd signed for us in the summer where everything was peachy and we went on that win and run, he might have been able to have sort of settled into the squad a little bit easier. So it's definitely true that the form that the club are in at the time is going to dictate just how much time the fans are going to give Chesnikov, because I think by the time he'll have signed in January, the expectation will have built and built and built, because we're already at that stage, you know, with players that you haven't actually seen yet, or players that are out injured long term, you know that they always just become better players just by that product, you know, being involved. So yeah, it'll just be a case of wait and see.
Yeah, you've just reminded me of the folly of building up a player for months and months before he comes in. It's happened, not just the Hearts, but it's happened before, and they've come in and been a disaster. Hopefully, fingers crossed, this isn't the case with this one. Let's move on to sort of in the same area, and that's another recent signing in Laundry Kabori. Quite a few comments came in about him. Craig Simpson says here, could Kabangu or Kabori start this weekend, or do we think McInnes will keep a settled team? We've got Skedin. Is that it? Skedin? Is that Joel from his holiday? With such a big build up to his signature, it's been a feel quiet or slow start from Kabori? Is there any chat on his progress? Is it likely for him to get more minutes on the park soon? There are a couple more which I'll bring in as we talk about him, but what have you made of the start that Kabori's made so far? I know we haven't seen much of him recently.
Yeah, very difficult for him in terms of the 2 games where he's been given a half. It's probably been as poor as Hearts have played this season. I don't think, just having watched him and having seen clips of him online as well, I still think he would be a better option for us through the middle, a direct option through the middle rather than out wide right. I wouldn't be starting him or Kabangu at the weekend. I do think it's a game where space will be at a minimum in behind the defenders. I think Falkirk will look to try and minimise the amount of space that's in behind them, especially, whilst the game's still 0-0. That can obviously open up as the game progresses. And if we can get an early goal, then Falkirk will then have to come out a little bit more. I think that's where I see Kabangu and Kabori just now, is the options to come off the bench when you can stretch the game. You saw how good Kabangu was at that at Ibrox a couple of weeks ago. That's as good as I've seen Kabangu play in a Hearts jersey. And I know he's had impacts in games where he's scored goals and he's done well. But in terms of his link-up play and his hold-up play and that is what I would want to see from a sub in that situation. So I think just now they'll be used in that sort of space. I think it's for Shanklin and Braga to sort of lose that jersey. And to be fair, they've only just started building up that relationship where Shanklin's coming short and Braga's still learning to not come short and try and stretch the defence and play beyond the defence. So I think it would be silly for McInnes to play about with that system just now. I think given the confidence that both those players will be on just now, definitely going to be looking to start them at the weekend.
Yeah, just following on from that, Smelly Pete says Braga and Shanklin looked good as a 2 up top, so unfortunately I wouldn't start anyone else just now, but they can come on for the last 20 minutes when we're 4-0 up. And Stuart Jambo says we're all desperate to see what Kabori can do, and I think Saturday may be the best fixture to try and get up and running. Now, even I agree with you and with Pete there that we should be sticking with Shanklin and Braga for the meantime, and I don't think Hearts should be underestimating Falkirk at all. But that said, could it still be the fixture for Kabangu or Kabori to play a part in, whether that is to come on later in the game and help kill it off, or whether it is to actually come on and help turn a draw into a win or whatever it is? Yeah,
definitely. I think, they're good options to have on the bench. And this is the thing. This is probably going to be one of our biggest strengths. You've already seen it in some recent weeks. I think Livingston and Motherwell were really good examples of where what we had coming off the bench compared to the opposition really made a huge difference in the second half of those matches. And I think having the likes of Kabangu and Kabori there will play a big part in that. I just think if you bring in Kabori and you drop either or Braga or Shanklin, I think it probably would be Braga if it was one of the two, then I think you're putting pressure on them, because the fans would first of all be questioning why Braga's out the team, and then you'd be putting the pressure on Kabori to come in and try and hit the ground running. I would think the best thing to try and do in terms of managing his game time is bringing him on in a situation where hopefully, I know Pete had mentioned, being 4 up. It might not be quite as comprehensive as that, but if you're a couple of goals up in a home match against Falkirk, there's going to be space in behind them. You can give Kabori 20-25 minutes in the hope that he can maybe get the goal in that time. That gives him the confidence. It puts a bit of credit in the bank as well with the fans, and it just means that if you do want to make that switch at a later stage in another fixture, fans would be less inclined to question it. Whereas I think just now, given how the 11 played against Ibrox, I wouldn't expect there to be too many changes, out with maybe 1 or 2 dependent on injuries.
Lynn Aoki says definitely stick with Shanks and Braga. Kabangu is a great player to have on the bench, quite like we Karjota too. Did you expect, we're talking about the front two sticking the same. We know that McInnes does like to switch things up. Do you see many other changes?
I'm not expecting too many changes. I think one of the changes is going to be dependent on where McAtee is with his foot. I think if there's any sort of small niggly doubt that playing him on Saturday risks him for the derby, I think he'll be put on ice, and I think they'll bring Borchgrevink in there because they'll view this as a fixture where they can sort of ease Borchgrevink slightly into it in terms of Hearts should have the majority of the ball, should be facing, and looking to go forward. So I think that's a potential change in terms of getting Borchgrevink in for there. It would then be a case, I would imagine, of putting Milne back in at left back. And then it would be a case of just seeing what they would maybe do in one of those wide positions. Has Kurjota done enough to maybe get included on the right-hand side? Would it be a case of maybe switching Kizadidis over and maybe putting Blair Spittle on the left? So I think there'll be 2 or 3 changes based on that, but I don't think there'll be too many other changes apart from that.
And looking a bit further forward, Stu Barton, he says, given Hibs' poor form coming into the derby, do you think we will win by 4 or 5 goals? I don't know about you, Scott, but I would say given the history of the Edinburgh derby, no.
Yeah, they're a funny side just now, Hibs. So up until Saturday, I think what David Gray was trying to do was he was trying to slightly tweak his system a little bit. So there wasn't huge formation changes, but I think what he was trying to do was push one of his midfield three a bit further forward. So he kind of had these 2 split 10s. He had sort of McGrath and Boyle playing behind Kieran Bowie. But I watched them against Dundee United and the gaps it was leaving in behind, because they don't even have what you'd class as a proper number 6 starting games for them just now. They're sort of playing Dylan Levitt at the base of their midfield, and Dylan Levitt's fine when you're in a fixture where you're going to have 70% of the ball. But see, when you ask him to start running towards his own goal, any Dundee United fan will tell you he's just next to useless with regards to that. So I think they've had a spell where they have been quite attacking, and they've maybe threw caution to the wind. When I watched them on Saturday at Ibrox, I felt as if there was a bit more caution to the game, and they were probably overly passive, which is probably one of the sort of sticking points that the Hibs fans would throw at them. And I think by the time we play them, it depends what they do tonight at Falkirk and on Saturday at Parkhead, but I do think you'll see a more sort of cautious approach for Hibs by the time that we play them, and I think they'll be quite happy for us to have the ball. So the scoreline is going to be dependent on just how proactive we are and how direct we go. There's certainly chances there to get goals. Hibs have looked a little bit ropey. They've not really had much continuity in their back three because Iredale's had a poor start to the season, and they've been trying to chop and change Hanley to integrate him into the team as well. But look, we fingers crossed should be the team in form going into that fixture. So it's one we should be looking forward to.
I wonder if that approach would play into Hearts' hands, because I think it kind of and in a different way to how the Rangers game did, because I think Hibs are a fairly cautious team, and Hearts went after Rangers and disrupted them, and I think Hibs allowed that second Rangers goal. They just allowed them. That's what Rangers have been trying to do all season. They haven't been able to do. Is like keep the ball for 20 minutes and pass it around and come back, and then get them to come out and then find gaps. And I don't know. I just think Hearts are going to want to go at them, and if Hibs sit in, it could play into Hearts' hands. But getting a bit ahead of ourselves. There's still a game to go before that. We'll dip into a few other questions. Danny Scott's asking here, even without the European shop window, do you expect any of the new players to be sold in January? That's quite an interesting one. I know that we've spoken about before that this is the model now, that if somebody comes in with the valuation or whatever, you don't stand in the way. You take the money and then you find a replacement, or you promote the replacement from within that's already there. But do you see it happening this quickly?
I'd be very surprised. I'd be very surprised if anyone moves on in January. I think even if you look at the people who have came in and had the biggest impact out of our summer signings, you've got Stuart Finlay, who's on loan. You've got McAtee, who has been a very underrated acquisition. I don't think he's anyone who's getting any headlines, so I very much doubt anyone would be looking at him. And then you've got Claudio Braga. But even then, I think people would probably want to see him show that kind of consistency over a season-long spell before they even start to maybe entertain some of the numbers that Hearts would maybe be looking at wanting for him. You've got to remember that the thing with the SPFL is there's many times you've seen strikers turn up, not just at Hearts, but other clubs where they do really well in that initial quarter of games. And because you're having to play each other 4, sometimes 5 times a season, you can get found out very quickly compared to other leagues where you're maybe coming up against each other once or twice a season. We've seen it with, Wanma is maybe a good example of that. Someone who comes in, has a really good 2 or 3 month spell and then really starts to sort of slide after that. I'm not suggesting that will happen with Braga, but I think I'd be very surprised if a team came in with big money offers. Plus, I think January, a lot of people are looking at stopgap signings at that time of year. They're looking at loan signings. They're looking at getting people in maybe on a cheap deal. It's never really the window where you see a lot of people looking at potential future players that are going to come in and impact on their squad for the following season. So I'd be very surprised if anyone left. If anyone does leave, it would probably be towards the other extreme where someone's just not settled at all and they're not just struggling on the park, but they're maybe struggling away from the pitch as well. They're maybe homesick and they're maybe looking to get back home. So that would be the only sort of example I could imagine of anyone leaving that we've just recently signed.
Sticking on the theme of potential exits, Steve Mack asks, some noise from Govan-Way that they should have went for McInnes. Do you think if we have a good season that Rangers would try for him? And yes, do you think he'd want that gig? As somebody else, I think it's Embra Craig, is coming in the comments afterwards saying he said no to them before. And I think the word at the time was that, I don't know if you disagree with me here, Scott, but the word at the time, I think, was that he kind of, he went, he sort of saw, he listened, and he wasn't convinced that that was the right move for him at that time, despite it would have been a step up for him at the time. And I don't know. I think Rangers are maybe in a worse state right now. Like right now, they could still improve and get better by the end of the season. But I think right now Rangers are in a worse state than maybe they were back then. I can't remember exactly when it was back then that he was kind of being touted for the Rangers job. But yeah, he has said no before.
Yeah, I think ultimately he wouldn't get a choice in the matter. I think unless there was a huge desire to take on board any sort of advice from people within the club or people that are already ingrained in Scottish football, I can't see this board looking at Derek McInnes and making him a top contender, regardless of how he does with Hearts this season. I just think if you look at the Russell Martin appointment and the fact that Ancelotti was the other option alongside him, I think they will be looking at people who have spent considerable time either down south or abroad. They have a certain sexy way of playing football.
They're more possession-based.
Yeah. And I just think in terms of an interview thing as well, I think those types of guys who have got all the talk, I think they're the types that they'll look at. I just don't think Derek McInnes is somebody who would appear on Rangers' radar. Again, unless they had such a bad season that they maybe decided to let some people from outside into the club and provide that advice. But unless that was to happen, then I just can't see it being a viable option for them. But I mean, look, they came in for him. It would always be a concern that he has those links with the club. But I'd like to think that we were in a position at that stage where you can see that we are really progressing. And I'd like to think that Tony Bloom would have some considerable influence in that decision as well.
Yeah, I mean, if Hearts, let's face it, if Hearts match Tony Bloom's ambitions, then it would be a step down to be going from Hearts to Rangers. So we want to live in a world where that's the case. And Lynn Ioke makes a good suggestion, saying it's time the manager had a song. A couple more comments before we finish up. Sydney the Divine asks what's next for the football department review. Is it due injuries or cost saving? Also, do you agree with the B team being disbanded? Is it all about cooperation agreements? I'm going to take the second part of this. I don't know exactly about the football department review, but the B team bit's a bit quite interesting. I was kind of indifferent to B teams when they first joined the Lowland League, Scott. I think there has been tangible benefits for Hearts. I think I don't think it's all been perfect. I don't think I do think there are issues when it comes to competition integrity and all that. Especially, I think what they've done to the Challenge Cup this year, despite Angus Beef be speaking quite positively about it. But I don't think it's. I think it's maybe coincidental with the cooperation loans, but it seems to have sort of run its course now. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I actually think that all the club are trying to do here is, again, just get ahead of the curve. I think the B team experiment itself, just overall, is sort of ran its course. I don't think this is just something that Hearts are looking at changing. I just think it's something that's not going to be existing in Scottish football in a year or two's time. So I think they're just looking at trying to get ahead of that and trying to see if they can restructure things. In terms of the first question about the football department, I really couldn't say. I think there's rumblings that potentially the next set of accounts will not look overly healthy. If that's the case, the club are maybe trying to do the right thing by maybe reviewing every part of the department and maybe looking to see if there is anything that can be cut to try and help with that. But then it could also just be a coincidence that it's maybe just coming in at the same time that Graham Jones has only been in the door maybe about a year, and he's maybe been using that last 12 months to maybe, have a total overhaul and sort of appraisal of what's been going on at the club, and has maybe now come to a stage where he can actually make decisions on changes that need to be made. So it could be a Graham Jones thing. It could be financially motivated. We probably won't really know that until maybe closer to the end of the year when the accounts come out. But I think either way, it's a good thing. It's good to know that they're not just standing still and that they're looking at this. It would be quite easy, given all the headlines that we're getting on the park just now, for a club to maybe stand still and just say, well, everything's going well. So it's good to know if it is something that Graham Jones has been mulling over for the last 12 months, that he's actually looking at and looking to make improvements in certain areas of the footballing department.
Yeah, I've no idea if it's all coincidental or not, but it seems to have come to an end of a cycle in terms of players as well, and that's nothing to do with the players who are available, who are playing for the B team this season. It's just more, I think a lot of them are further younger and further behind in the development than a lot of the players that have come through in recent times, who are now either in the Hearts first team or on loan in the Championship or League One and things like that. So I think it's just sort of come to a bit of an end of a cycle, and I don't know if that's playing into their thinking.
I think as well, like, just moving away from that topic slightly, I think regardless of whether you've got a B team, a reserve team, an under-20 team, that's not where the true issue lies with the development of Scottish youngsters. It starts at 14 and 15, and this is where it needs to improve on. This is where we're struggling. You're seeing plenty of club teams, plenty of international teams matching the best that the world has to offer until they get to that stage. And there's something about that stage in their development where they're not quite getting it right in Scotland in terms of that pathway. And that's what the club need to be looking at, regardless of how that pathway looks in terms of a B team or a reserve team. There's something about that specific area of the pathway of Scottish youngsters that needs to be totally overhauled and reviewed by the government and the governing bodies at the SFA. That goes way beyond just a Hearts problem.
Definitely. I have one starred comment left. Thanks to everybody who has got involved. We will finish after this one from Ryan. Was there interest in Nieuwenhof over the window? I don't know that. Always wanted him to start with Benny or Devlin, but as you makes it a doubt, he will play. McInnes is very keen to say, not rule anybody out. Do you see? I think I see Nieuwenhof as somebody who's got an outside chance of playing himself in at some point, whether it's just a horses for courses, he comes in for something, or whether there's a few injuries and suspensions and he comes in. I think there's some players that I would look at in the squad and say, I don't think you're going to get any or many minutes under McInnes. Nieuwenhof, I think, has got an outside chance of getting a game. Yeah,
I would agree. I think, again, we've talked before about midfielders and some of those midfielders being situational midfielders. So, Devlin and Benny is that pair. That's very much on a situation-to-situation basis. It's dependent on the fixture. Those two won't start every league fixture. You've then got Ajew coming in. You've got McAtee, but again, he might be required to sort of help fill out on the right side of the park at various stages of the season as well. So there is potentially a spot for Nieuwenhof. I suppose one of the things that might influence whether he stays on or not will be whether we decide to recall Macaulay Tate in January, because we've got the option to recall him in. I think if we decide to recall Macaulay Tate in, that just pushes him further down the pecking order, and I think it would be really hard for him to get back involved then. But I think between now and January, again, dependent on injuries and suspensions, and if you look at the personnel in the Hearts midfield, we know that they can get a mixture of the two of them, then I think there's always an outside chance. And, you know, from what I've seen of him and heard about him, I think he's the right type of professional where he will keep his standards up in case he is required. Yeah. So I think in terms of having someone that is maybe on the periphery just now, he's a good option to bring in if you needed him, because I don't think he would let you down.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think McInnes would like him. He just can't find a space for him. He has to cut somewhere, and that's just unfortunately where it's fallen. Right, Scott, thank you very much for giving up your time to join us this evening. And thanks to everybody for joining us. Please check out everything out at heartstandard.co.uk. Subscribe before you go if you haven't already. And I'm going to get out of here and lie down because that's what I need.